Welcome, everyone, to episode 16 of Freedom for Wild Horses. And I am delighted today to have as my guest Jim Brown, who is an extraordinary wildlife photographer. And he has had galleries in Wyoming and is looking for a new space for his High Plains Reflections gallery. And his images of wild horses are truly extraordinary because of the time that he spends getting to know the horses. So I wanted to talk to him today about the Northlander Complex, which is 4 herd management areas in Wyoming near Riverton. And they're probably some of the least well-known herd management areas in Wyoming, but Jim has spent many, many years out there with those horses. So that's what I wanted to talk about today, and also about the BLM's plan to really eradicate these herds. So welcome, Jim. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you for the kind words, Carol. I am glad to be here.
So tell me, how long has it been? How many years have you been going out there to see these wild horses?
Oh, well, if you count as a kid, my dad worked in an oil-filled plant that was just on the edge of the Conic Creek HMA. So I'd have to say since I was 5, so that would be 60 years, 50 years,
Wow.
a long time. We've been watching these horses, yeah, a long, long time.
And so what do you do when you go out to see these horses? What do you do when you go out there?
Well, as a photographer, that aspect of it, I'm only interested in sunrise and maybe 30 minutes after the sun rises, and then 30 minutes, an hour before it sets. So that's when I take most of my pictures. But with the horses, I pull out my camper and I just tend to stay there for 4, 5, 6 days at a time, and really get to know the area. I grew up out there, but still it's such a large area and such a rugged area with Beaver Rim and the Muskrat Basin. You're always finding new roads and new areas where the horses are going. So it's always a thrill to be out there. Yeah.
So yeah, and I see that it's 375,000 acres out there between the 4 HMAs, and that's Conic Creek, Dishpan Butte, Muskrat Basin, and Rock Creek Mountain. And so tell me a little bit about each area, because I know they're quite different.
They are. Muskrat Basin is the largest HMA in the complex, and it runs from just behind I would say north of the Green Mountain HMA all the way to what's Highway 136 or the Gas Hills Road. So right there's almost 27, 28 miles.
Wow.
That one runs, and then it's probably I would say 16 miles wide until it hits the Conic Creek HMA. So Muskrat in the Northlander complex is the largest, and it's the most rugged. When we did counts out there a couple of years ago, we wanted to do our own counts. We were able to count Dishpan, Conic Creek, Rock Creek. Those were really easy areas to count because of the environment and the way that the landscape is. Muskrat, when we got our end result with Muskrat, a person asked me if I was comfortable with it, and I said I'm probably within 30% of the wild horses in that area, because there's just too many places for them to hide and inaccessible the way we were counting. So Muskrat's really tough. Conic Creek is rugged, but it's got a lot of access to it. The Poston Ranch, I believe you were on that road the other day taking pictures.
Just a couple weeks ago. Yeah. The roads are good and a little washed out, but not too bad.
Yeah. So the Poston Ranch road gives you really good access because for several miles, it will tie on to Highway 135 from 136. So you could actually make a big loop in that HMA, which makes it really great for viewing the wild horses, unless they're not in the or in the, and then you have to get off the beaten path. But
Right.
this year, all the water that we had out there, it was absolutely gorgeous, and the horses spent all summer long just right in that Poston Ranch uh, drainage. So it was very it was very good for people that was going out green to the area. Yes.
Well, and I know that you have made a huge difference as far as people knowing about these horses and these HMAs, because before you started talking to people and taking people out there, people really didn't know. And you've been so generous with your time with people. And I think it's so good that people can see the horses, show people pictures of them that I mean, people, I still get comments. People go, they're not starving. I'm like, yeah, no, they're not
Well,
starving. That's just a lie. Yeah,
uh,
and showing how healthy they are and their families. I mean, that makes such a difference because then people care more.
oh, absolutely. And your view of that is you're spot on because before the roundup or the roundup announcement, I believe in 2020, 2021 of the Northlander complex, uh, hardly I never seen another soul out there. I'm sort of a grumpy old man growing up in Wyoming out on the prairie. I sort of liked it that way. I really didn't. But then I got to thinking to myself, if I'm going to fight this roundup, I couldn't fight the 2012 one. Me and my wife were had plans to move to Alaska and to do some photography work up there. And we didn't have, I didn't have enough, uh, I guess, enough information to really fight it back in 2012. So they did the roundup then, but then in 2020, I'm living in Riverton. I've been setting out with these horses for the last 7, 8 years, almost every other day,
Mm,
and I really wanted to get the word out there to fight this roundup, and I was lucky enough to get a lot of people interested, and a lot of people like yourself, Kimberly Curley, Sandy, Sharkey, a lot of good people that are very well known in the horse world to come out and take a look, and in turn, a lot of people have been out to this HMA now, and like I say, in 2012, the first roundup, there wasn't two people that had been out there looking at horses, and now it's a weekly occurrence.
yeah.
So we've sort of got the tide changed. People know it's there. The BLM cannot just blow through this like they have in the past. They
Yes.
they picked up Northlander. Just, I mean, it was like a give me for them. They
Yes.
nobody complained, but now they're really struggling with all the comments and stuff to their plan. Northlander isn't a give me anymore.
Right. Well, and the plan, so for people to know, they announced a plan to round up over a 10-year period and sterilize 95% or more of the stallions, give Gonacon and IUDs to the mares, and they were going to remove 1,000 horses right after this was announced. And this is truly the most egregious, most punishing plan I have seen, other than zeroing out a herd. But it's virtually zeroing it out. I mean, if you sterilize 95% of the stallions and you give Gonacon, which will sterilize after 2 shots, and IUDs to the mares, I mean, you're basically wiping the herd out.
It's just extinction, but then they've got a fallback Well, it wasn't us. The horses are gone now due to, unforeseen circumstances, but it was their circumstances that caused the depredation of the herds. And what really amazes me, and it strikes me every time I talk about this, is you go back to the National Academy of Sciences, and for a herd to stand on its own, genetically stable, it's got to have 200 horses in it, 250. Some people say 245, well, 270, whatever it is. I'm going to say 200. But you take these HMAs in Northlander, Connacht, for instance, is low AML that they're shooting for is 60 horses. Well,
Right.
60 horses, that isn't genetically valuable.
No.
It's just like wiping them out. So, with that, along with the the fierce program they've got to sterilize everything, these horses will not make it in Northlander. They'll be gone, and they can zero out the
The
complete.
rest.
Yeah, they can just take it out because there is not one HMA in Northlander. This guy, I think, Muskrat's got 156 or
Right.
something. No, 250. I'm sorry, 250 high animal number.
Low is 160. Low is 160
Yeah,
for muskrat.
low 160. So they're shooting for 160 below National Academy of Sciences number to even be a genetically responsible herd. So I
And
don't know what they're trying to
their
do.
justification is they say, well, there's interchange between the herd management areas. What have you noticed about that?
Not so much. And I got in an argument with with a wild horse person in Rollins. She was saying they were jumping the fences. And I go, no, I've ever seen and I'm sure they do, don't get me wrong, but I've never ever seen a wild horse jump one of these barbed wire fences. Now, when the cattle run through and knock them down or they fall down in the winter, yes, the herds will intermingle, but those fences are only between a couple of HMAs like Connacht Creek, Rock Creek, and Muskrat Basin. Now, I'm not for sure what the Rock Creek deal was, why they even made it an HMA. It sits in the middle. It's a little tiny private piece of ground with a little bit of BLM on it,
Mm.
mostly private, and it sits in the middle of Muskrat and Connacht Creek. It's a really rugged area. It's a place called Boiler Draw,
Mm.
and horses, they don't stay there. There's that you could call that herd is zero. It isn't got a herd that lives there. Now they come through from the south in the summertime from Muskrat, and in the wintertime, the horses from Connacht Creek will go up into there.
Mm.
So
So
it
there is
is
a little interchange.
there is, but it's I wished somebody could do a study on wild horses. That's one thing that just really aggravates me is every animal in Wyoming is collared. Every grizzly. I mean, they have never collared wild horses to see what their range is to justify this intermingling of herds. It's just the BLMs. Oh, they're intermingling of herds. Well, yeah, and Frosty the Snowman lives out there 5 times a year. I mean, the statement is the same, but there's no validity to it. So
Yeah, no, they do need to do studies. Instead of rounding up horses, this herd has been left alone since 2012. So it makes it ideal to study it.
oh,
What happens to these horses when they're left alone? Let's find that out. Does the
well,
birth rate drop if there's no roundups? Probably. I'd like to see some studies on that.
you're absolutely right, and especially if you got to watch Scott Baskin's debate. It was a couple nights ago where the senator kept saying that them herds double in 4 years. Well, I've been watching the Northlander complex. It's never. ever doubled. And from 2014 to 2023, I've got full counts in 3 of the 4 HMAs that I'll say are 98% accurate, and they've never reached over 14%. 14, 15% is a good full year.
Yeah,
And,
because
and
foals die. I mean, if a
yeah,
lot of foals don't make it, and if there's a bad winter, you have a lot of the older horses dying off as well, like this last winter.
exactly. Yeah, and I know my count in muskrat was 57 dead horses just in what I could get around last winter. So,
And so much of that area you can't even get into.
well, yeah, you and I both we flew over it together and tried to do some looking, but the snow was so deep. I was disappointed in that because I couldn't see the depredation that the winter was having on the herds.
Right.
Yeah.
And when I asked the wild horse and burro expert in the area, Clay Stott, I said, so did you do a count after the winter? I think that would be a good idea since so many of these horses may have died and it might change your plan. He said, oh, well, we'll do a count right before the roundup. We won't do one before then. Well, that doesn't make any sense.
That's another thing that came up in that debate. That the gentleman, I can't remember the senator's name, and I'm glad, but uh, he was saying that the BLM uses infrared, they use helicopters, they use drone. I can't remember what all he says to count these horses. You know, Clay told me one time they fly over twice every 3 or 4 years. That's how they count. That's how he said they count the horses in Northlander. Twice every 3 or 4 years. No infrared, no drones, none of this stuff that I've ever seen them use in Wyoming.
They just started to use infrared in the checkerboard herds.
Oh,
Just
did they?
this
Okay.
year. This year. They
Because of all
haven't.
the, yeah.
So no, they didn't use it in Northlander, and they feed their information into the statistical program. It's called the statistical double count. So it's not even an actual count of the horses. It's a
Exactly.
statistical program.
And they've got that factor in there and they can set that factor whatever they want. Well, we missed 22% of the horses. Well, how would you miss 22%? I think that's the number. The last flyover got Northlander was 22% added. That's a heck of an adder. And from our counts, we had 12-man team, 12 people. So we had 6 teams out combing these HMAs, and we got great counts where we could, and our counts, honestly, weren't far off of what the BLM said they thought was there. So they had a good guess, but we were still 22 to 25% below their numbers. We were never above their numbers,
Right.
and that was before all the colts were born. We did it in June, and I've seen colts dropping in August. So, that would be a factor on our counts that that would be incorrect.
Right. 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 So, what is it like when you go out? What do you do when you go out to see the horses?
Uh, I take my trailer. I take my co-pilot Waylon. He's my dog, and this year we watch them from a distance to see what they're doing. For the first couple of weeks we go out, let's just say we're headed out in March, April,
Okay.
when the horses are coming out of the winter ground, coming on to the low areas where you can see them and watch them. We'll watch and see where they're watering. We'll get up on a big high knob and we'll just pay attention for 3 or 4 days and see where the herds are going, what they're doing. And then when we get that information, we can start getting closer to them. We can work our way down. We can work our way into a water hole, and we try never to go into the water holes when the horses are there. I always like to get there before the horses. Uh, we've got a spreadsheet of times that the horses water. So say they're watering, we figured they water at 7 in the morning and at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Well, we'll get to the water holes before then. And thank goodness these horses, they're used to vehicles. They're used to there's two roads running in there. So they're not real scared of vehicles. So as long as you stay in your vehicle and watch them, they're fine. The minute you get out of a vehicle, they're gone. I mean, that's the way I love it, because they're truly wild horses. They don't want anything to do with you, and they're gone. So we'll sit there on a water hole and we'll watch them on water holes, and we'll watch them disperse from the water hole, see where they go to graze, and then we'll work into that areas where they're going to graze. So we always try to leave the water holes before the horses. Then we go to where they're going to graze. And I always want the horses, always want them coming to me. I never ever try to drive into wild horses. You're going to spook them if you try getting close to them. So I enjoy them getting close to me.
Right.
So I'll go park my pickup in a place where I know when they leave this horse or this water hole, they're going to graze right into me. And they do. And I've had so many people in my pickup, my wife, my grandkids, I mean, bunches of them, they can't believe that these horses, because if you reached out of your window, you could throw a rock. I mean, they're within 20 feet of your vehicle because they're not scared of the vehicle and they're grazing around it. And a lot of times I get comments on Facebook and social media, well, you're too close to the horses. And I go, well, no, the horses are too close to me, because the way I do it, I don't get close to the horses. I allow them to get used to me, and they just graze right up to the pickup, and then they'll graze past and they'll work their way past, and then you go, okay, well, they're going to work their way. By 5 o'clock, they're going to be over to this water hole. So then we'll turn around and we'll go to that water hole before they get there. And then they'll work their way into that water hole. And that's sort of what we do out there, is just basically wait for horses to come into the area. So
right. And of course, there's more interaction around the water hole too, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I love getting around the water holes, and I love the springtime, because you've got all the turmoil with the guys trying to get the gals and all that, and it isn't as hot in the summer. When it gets hot, the horses, you know, like all of us, they just want to be left alone. They want to, just lay around and eat every once in a while, and go to the water hole. And there isn't a lot of action through the summer. And that's when we do a lot of our, I try to count the foals. We go out and we just watch them with field glasses, and we try to figure out, okay, this herd here has been here for 9 years. Here's the stallion. Here's the mares. You know, this is the family unit here. And we try to figure out, and we try to document all that stuff in them hot summer months, because the picture taken, let's face it, it isn't really that great. So
especially in the middle of the day. Yes, absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah. Not to say that I wouldn't take a picture in the middle of the day if something fantastic happens.
So tell me about tell me about something that happened that was really great this year that you remember.
Well, this year it was interesting. About, and I can't remember the year, but I'm going to say 5 or 6 years ago, we picked up a little bum, and he was the first one I'd ever picked up, and he come running right to the pickup, and that was, 5 years.
A foal with no mom. Yeah.
Foal with no mom. Mom had passed away giving birth, it looked like. So he was about 2 days old, never ever ate. And he comes running right up to the pickup. I mean, and then he lays down in front of me, afraid I'm going to leave. He runs up to the pickup. I put out my hand, and he put his nose in my hand. And then I went to make a phone call, and I was calling my niece, that is a lieutenant in the sheriff's department, because I didn't want to put this little guy in my pickup and be arrested for it.
No.
A horse back of my vehicle. So I didn't, at that time, I didn't trust the BLM. So I wanted somebody to know what I was doing.
Right.
And fortunately, they sent out an officer and escorted us into town, and we got the little foal. Anyways, this year we picked up two little foals.
Wow.
So I don't know what it was about this year, but maybe it was the bad winter. But I'm just thinking, if I was the amount of time I was out there and I picked up two, I wonder how many don't make it. But that was the highlight of this year was the two little foals. But there's always Elvis changing colors. That just amazes me how they change colors.
Yeah, he's a spectacular gray stallion. And yeah, so he's been getting lighter and lighter, right?
He was gun barrel blue when I first started taking pictures of him, and now you've seen him this year. He's just almost apple gray. Yeah.
Yeah, just gorgeous apples. Yeah.
Oh yeah, and the way they change colors. So Elvis changing colors was a highlight for me. I guess this year. Crazy's always fun. He's a horse I call Crazy that's out there, and he's just a big, real dark bay. And one time he was running. I was at the water hole, and he was mad at somebody. I had been there for an hour, and they came in right past me. They knew I was there, and I thought Crazy wasn't going to shut down by the time he hit my pickup. He was about 15 feet away, and I thought he was going to try to jump over it. He was
gosh.
this other stallion, and fortunately, he got the brakes on. But Crazy had some interesting times this year. So, yeah, I enjoyed watching Crazy this year. He was pretty. And there's, Angelique, another wild horse advocate. From Thermopolis, she was out there today, and she was giving me pictures. What's the name of this horse? I go, I don't know. Being I'm the only one out there naming them. I don't. I just name the ones that I can, identify. And
yeah,
those horses running around out there, they're absolutely phenomenal. I can document a ton of them, but a lot of them I can't.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and there's probably so many that you might see for the first time and then maybe not see again for years, right?
Yeah, and that sort of goes back to your question of the intermingling of the HMAs. Every once in a while a stud will show up, and you'll wonder, where did he come from?
Right.
So there is a small amount of that, but nothing to make a number change with the BLM's thought. And there again, you out there, and I'm trying to think, since 2000, let's say the first round of 2012, I've actually identified two horses that have came in that I can say were dumped by somebody on the HMA. You always hear they're feral horses, they're dumped out here. They're not. Two in 2012. What is that? 11 years.
Yeah, and you would think probably if people do dump horses out there, a lot of them don't survive because it's no life for a domestic horse, and especially in the winter in that area is really harsh.
You're absolutely right, and these horses. I get so aggravated when they're called feral because they are not. They're wild horses. They've been out there their whole lives, and they're documented out there their whole lives, and they can survive. They're just like the buffalo in Yellowstone. They survive these big, horrible winters.
They know where to go. They know because of their families. They know where to go. And they know where to go to graze, where to get shelter, all that sort of thing. That's all part of being wild.
Absolutely. And me and you both had heartbreak, going into this spring, losing horses that we had watched forever, but we fight for them to be wild. And so when we fight for them to be wild, we've got to have a tear in our eye, but we got to say, I'd lots rather them go on the range than go with the BLM, putting them in a pen and then shooting them because, well, his hoof was cracked or he's only got one eye. Scar out there on Connet Creek. He's been out there for years and years, lived through a brutal wound to the side that I thought was going to kill him. And then a few years ago lost an eye. So he's a one-eyed stallion running around out there, but nobody would ever know.
Right.
He's adjusted, but the BLM get him in a pen. Here's this horse that's lived out there all of his life. They'll just kill him because, well, he's only got one eye.
Right.
Well,
or the horses that are whole getting sent to Wheatland where they have strangles and some of them dying from that. I mean, it's a horrible way for a horse to live.
Yeah. And Wyoming is a horrible state for wild horses. Absolutely. I mean, the government don't like, our state government is so opposed to them, and it's just the livestock industry. It's 0.1% of Wyoming's GDP, not even a blip, but we act like it rules the nest, and it's just a tough life in Wyoming for wild horses, and I don't know if you've been following the Wind River Indian Reservation, but I've been following that off and on from what I can get. I talked to a lady, brand inspector in DuBois. She said that she couldn't confirm the number, but she says it's over 10,000 that they've rounded up. You know what the state inspectors and brand inspectors are showing shipping out of that state or that county and Wind River Reservation's less than 5 horses. So 10,000 horses have been shipped out of the Wind River Indian Reservation with no paperwork. And they're entering into the slaughterhouses and stuff. You're seeing them now. You're seeing foals. I think Diane said somebody had some foals, but one had strangles on some kill pen that a lady rescued. How does that happen? The state has to be aware of all these horses and just let them go. That's state law. If you pass county line, you've got to have a brand inspected.
Right.
And so the paperwork's got to be there, but they won't show anybody. And they're just in the kill areas right now, going to Mexico and Canada by the truckloads, and nobody can track them down. And that's 10,000 horses.
Wyoming has the second most wild horses after Nevada. Yes. And we have some of the most beautiful, amazing wild horses in Wyoming. And so it's really tragic that Wyoming and the BLM want the horses gone. Yep. So, and so it's really important for people to know what these plans are to be done to these horses. I recently reached out to the public affairs person who's in charge of the Lander area, and she said they did not get funding this fall for the roundup, which, if it's true, you always have to take this stuff with a grain of salt because they could announce it tomorrow. If it's true, that's terrific. Another year is always good for the wild horses because things could change in their favor later. So the longer we can keep them out there, the better.
Oh, absolutely. And it's just a game of who can spin the propaganda the best. And it's disturbing that, the advocacy group's ability to spin and get information out there is so tiny compared to the BLM and all the state and federal organizations that we're going up against. We can't keep up with it.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. I think the only good thing is the BLM's running out of money right now. So that's a good thing as far as I'm concerned. I mean, that would be the only good thing about a government shutdown. Maybe they'd have to stop all the roundups. I would like that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I'm sitting on needles to see what their funding does for next year.
Right.
I think they're getting a lot of flack from other senators, you know.
After the roundup in Nevada
Oh, absolutely.
with the 40 horses that were killed, I mean brutally killed, really showcasing how abusive this whole system is.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
Yep.
and it breaks your heart when something like this happens, especially to horses that you know and love. It's just absolutely heartbreaking and
Yep.
not something we want these horses to go through at all.
Yep. You're absolutely right. I was out with another photographer out of Jackson, and we were sitting in Connet Creek drinking a pop and just killing some time at a water hole. And a pair of horses that have been together forever. I from birth to, I imagine they're 13, 14 now, two males, and I call them Lewis and Clark. They're just two buckskin looking wild Mustangs, and they're, if you look at one, the other one isn't 10 foot behind him or 20 foot, no matter where they're at, they're just, it used to be a game with my grandkids. I'd go, there's Lewis, and my little granddaughter would go, oh, where's Clark? And they would find him. And I told Tom, I said, what would happen if one of them got caught? Just
Right.
one. And the other one was out there without him.
Right.
I'm going, as the bond that they form is
Yes.
so strong, and people don't understand that. People downplay that. But
Yes.
the bond these horses form are so strong that, I don't know if one of them would make it without the other.
Right.
I mean, I've never seen them apart. And it's just interesting to me to think the BLM or we could allow somebody to come out there and disrupt a good ecosystem that's going with the wild horses and disrupt it like they're going to do and not pay any consequences.
Well, when I looked at the list of the grazing allotments, it looks like it's mostly cattle and some sheep out there. Thousands and thousands and thousands of cattle and sheep are allowed to be out there. And somehow they think there's about 2,000 horses out there in the whole area in all 4 HMAs. Somehow these horses are degrading the range. Nothing else is degrading the range, but the horses are.
Yeah, they had 2,500 sheep out there. The way it would work is the cows would come in about the end of May, and they would start grazing the cow-calf pairs all the way to the end of October. And this is our range management. And then at the end of October, the range would be free from any livestock for like 20 days. And then sheep would come in. 2,500 to 3,000 sheep came in from Utah to graze a few years ago, and they grazed until May.
Ugh.
And then they had to be out the 1st of May.
So the cattle could come in.
So the cattle can come in at the end of May. So
right.
We're not giving the ecosystem enough time
to
just take a breath, much less.
And April and May is when the grass is coming in.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So grazing it down when it's barely growing is a terrible idea as far as managing land. Anybody knows that.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And if if you travel in Wyoming and go up towards the Whirlwind, you go up towards McCullough Peak HMA, but instead of McCullough Peak area, go over the mountain towards Grable and up towards Pryor Mountain HMA, and look at that land in between there. And there hasn't been a grass that grows in there for 80, 90 years. because that's the very first sheep. When the sheep came into Wyoming, that's where they put them. They came into the Bighorn Range there and all around Worland and that area, and those sheep just ruined the environment, and it's never came back. And I'm talking the sheep got out of there in the 60s. So, there's 40, 50, 60 years that nothing but cattle have been in there. And the grass, there's still no grass. I mean, the livestock industry just doesn't realize, and there's
or they don't care because it's public land and it's not their land, so they can wreck it if they want to.
Yeah, you go to their land and they've got all these nice eco willow meadow forage areas, that are just absolutely gorgeous. But no, on public land, it's like, I've sent pictures to the BLM. They 4 or 5 years ago, they reworked a water hole. They pulled all the pipe out of the pump and recased the pump, took a new pump and put it in there. And then they put these 2 big tractor tires there for water. So that means that the old water tank, this big 30 by 30 water tank, all the pipe that came out of the well, all the equipment for the pump and stuff, 5 years it's been laying on public lands. They didn't even pick it up. That's what the rancher thinks of public lands. They don't even clean up after themselves when the BLM gives them 50% of the financing to redo their well.
Oh, wow.
To me, that's just, we're not managing, the BLM is not managing the areas like they should be.
No.
Now,
and I've been hearing also about livestock being out longer than they should be the last few years since COVID, because they're not saying no. The ranchers have their livestock out there and the BLM does nothing.
Yeah. Well, look at Bundy. What was that, a couple of years ago, that the big standoff was at Nevada, I believe. Yeah.
In Utah, actually. Yeah.
Oh, was it in Utah? Okay.
Yeah.
Here's a guy that's been corrupting the system forever.
I'm sorry, Oregon. It was Oregon.
Was it Oregon?
Between us, we'll get the right state. Yeah.
But I mean, here's a guy that was corrupting the system forever, and nobody ever told him no.
Right.
And they did tell him no. He got a bunch of people with guns to say, "Well, we're going to stay here anyways." And well, yeah.
I wanted to ask you about Dishpan Butte because, unlike the other HMAs, there is a highway through Dishpan Butte.
Yes, 135.
So the horses on the other side of that highway, they're definitely not interchanging with the rest of the herds, right?
Absolutely not. No, them herds, it would be on the west side of the highway.
Right.
They're the Dishpan Butte herd. And on the east side of the highway, you can get some fluctuation with muskrats.
Right.
I've actually seen horses from Crooks Mountain get on the other side of the road.
At Dishpan.
Over around Dishpan, yeah.
Wow.
On the other side of that road that goes through there to Jeffrey City.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I was thinking, that population, that part of Dishpan is pretty isolated.
Very much so, yeah.
And I mean, what would they do? Just take all the horses out of there completely? I mean, how would you manage that? I mean, it just doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't. And what is it? The low AML in Dishpan's 50 and the high 100?
Yeah, so, that sounds right.
And to me, Dishpan's the easiest. Let me see if I can find my count on Dishpan. Okay, so we counted, BLM's count was 270 horses in Dishpan in 2022. 270. Our actual count, and Dishpan isn't hard to count, was 156.
Okay. And then, and how would you divide it up? I mean, it just doesn't make any sense.
dish pans are real odd because a lot of times that herd that's on the west side of the road, because of just age and low foal crops and stuff, that number would go down to 15, 20 horses in there any given year. I mean,
Right.
there's not a lot of horses in there.
Right. Right.
So to me, the BLM's just wasting money worrying about dish pan at all.
Right. But I think there's a lot of grazing allotments on that area right across
Oh, I'm sure
the highway. Yeah.
You got the
So,
Yellowstone Ranch that's there on the creek. Yeah.
right. So, I mean, Jim, I would like to see these horses left alone. And if they have to use birth control, not sterilizing the horses, for goodness sakes.
And that's one of the problems. PZP is a great drug. Sometimes I'm for it, sometimes I'm against it, but in this area, it just will not work because you're going to have to round up the horses anyways to give them the drug. So,
do you think bait trapping would work though at water holes?
To a degree, I don't know if it would work enough for like muskrat and Connet Creek. It might be better in dish pan, and certainly Rock Creek would be easy, but I don't know if it would work enough to make a change that the BLM wants. I mean, Look at Paula Peak; it's working great there, but the BLM's still whining.
Well, they're still whining and they're planning a roundup, which is crazy.
Yeah. That I wished I had the number. And at one time I was talking to a gentleman with the Chamber of Commerce at Cody, and it was just a talk over a drink one night. But he said that several $1 million comes in to the city of Cody because of the McCulloch Creek HMA.
Of course.
Dollars that they did a study one time, and this has been 5 years ago, and the amount of tourists coming in there, the guide services that run out of the motels to take them out to the HMAs, the motels, the dining. I mean, it was a big number that HMA brought to the city of Cody, and last I heard that the change in the Chamber of Commerce is they're for the roundup. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But
well, and I'm sure they think those that don't care for the wild horses probably think, well, we've got Yellowstone. It's not going to impact our tourism too much if we lose the horses.
No,
unfortunately.
Well,
and you don't see much tourism in Riverton for the wild horses.
Not at all. They're in a pretty unique spot in the country that we're not close to any other state's borders, so you won't get the influx of people from Utah or Colorado necessarily that like to look at wild horses into the HMAs.
Right.
But,
yeah. So I think it's just a waiting game right now because, they can't round up there in the winter, obviously.
No.
I mean, there wouldn't be enough access to be able to get trucks and all that sort of stuff in there in the winter. I mean, October is probably as late as they can go, right?
I would think so, unless we look at a very
mild winter.
And then I could see them try it. They round it up into February. And what was it, the Great Divide Basin or one of those HMAs?
Yeah. Yep. I was there in February in 2011. Oh my gosh, it was so cold. But the terrain is different in Northlander Complex, though. I mean, I would think it would be really tough to get in there.
I would think it'd be very tough myself. Yeah.
So
just hate to second guess the BLM.
I know.
Yeah.
And they've been really bad about not giving us any notice. They used to give us like a month notice with a roundup. Now it's down to days.
Yeah.
So it's really hard to predict what's going to happen.
Yeah, they
And
don't want nobody showing up.
no, they don't want observers. They don't want people witnessing what they're doing. And yeah, which is really bad. We don't want that to happen.
No, not at all. Yeah. I just continue to fight the spin that the wildlife industry, hunting's a big, big part of Wyoming. It's just the spin from there, the spin from the livestock. It's just a continual fight to counteract their untruths.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, Jim, I really appreciate you being on today on the podcast. And people can look for Jim's website, highplainsreflections.com, to find out more about him and see his beautiful artwork of the wild horses, and also wild horses, also animals all over. And I will keep everybody posted about if we hear anything about a roundup coming this year. We're hoping not. So thank you for being on Freedom for Wild Horses. And that's it.
Okay, Carol, thank you so much. I appreciate everything you do.
Thank you.